Hey there, welcome back to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're tackling a topic that I think resonates with so many English learners. It's that quest to sound more natural.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting beyond just the words on the page.
We've got a fantastic stack of sources for this deep dive, actually shared by you, our listeners, exploring exactly how to bridge that gap between, let's say, grammatically correct English and English that really flows with the rhythm and ease of a native speaker.
That's right. If you've ever found yourself understanding individual English words perfectly, but then feeling a bit lost when native speakers connect them all together at speed.
Or maybe you feel your own spoken English sounds a bit stiff, a little, I don't know, textbook.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Then this duck dive is really built just for you. It's all about unlocking that natural sound, getting that more effortless feel.
And it's important to say up front, this isn't about losing your own identity or your accent or anything like that. Not at all.
No, definitely not. It's more about adding tools to your toolbox.
Right. Understanding the nuances so you can comprehend faster speech better and maybe choose to express yourself in ways that feel, well, authentic in different situations.
And the sources we're looking at today, they make it really clear you don't necessarily need to pack your bags and move to an English-speaking country to achieve this. That's a common misconception.
Yeah, good point. These techniques are things you can start applying right now, right where you are.
So our mission, really, in this deep dive is to properly unpack what your sources offer. We're going to dig into concrete, actionable methods.
Like how to truly listen, almost like a language detective.
Exactly, and a really powerful practice technique for copying native patterns, how to expand your usable vocabulary with those everyday phrases.
Uh-huh. And also key pitfalls to watch out for, things not to do.
Yes, those two. And importantly, the subtle cultural dimensions that are embedded in spoken English, things like tone and rhythm.
Okay, so it's about training your ear to hear more deeply, and I guess training your mouth to produce those sounds and rhythms with more naturalness.
It's a journey, for sure, but one with practical steps.
All right, let's stop delaying then and jump straight into what the sources say is the absolute foundational skill. Where do we start?
Well, what the material emphasizes first and foremost is that the path to sounding natural, it begins not necessarily with speaking more, but with listening differently.
Differently, how so?
It means becoming a conscious observer of how native speakers actually use the language in real life. You need to move beyond just hearing the words themselves.
And pay really keen attention to how those words are delivered, the music of it.
Precisely. The tone, the rhythm, and critically how words connect together.
Okay, so it's like shifting your focus, like you said, not just the what, but the how. If you wanted to learn, say, jazz music,
Good analogy.
you wouldn't just read the notes on a page, would you? You'd listen really intently to experienced jazz musicians, paying attention to their timing, their improvisations, the way they phrase things that isn't actually written down.
Exactly that. And for English, the sources highlight listening for that tone, for the rhythm, and really crucially, for how words connect.
Ah, okay. And this connects to that concept the sources talk about a lot, connected speech.
Yes, connected speech. This is arguably one of the biggest reasons why spoken natural English can sound so different from the individual words you might see written down or, hear in slower, carefully pronounced speech, like maybe in a language class.
Right, because words in natural conversation, they don't just sit there in isolation with little gaps between them, do they?
Not at all. They flow together. They often merge. Sounds change. Sometimes sounds even disappear completely.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think, and where those classic learner frustrations often come from. Your sources give some perfect, really everyday examples, like take the question, what are you doing?
Okay, yeah. Simple question.
If a learner pronounces each word super distinctly, what are you doing? It sounds, well, pretty unnatural, right? Very stiff.
Definitely stiff. Robotic almost.
Yeah.
The material explains how a native speaker will almost invariably connect and reduce that phrase.
So how does that happen? Let's break that specific example down further based on the source's analysis. What are you doing becomes...
It transforms into something much closer to what you doing.
What you doing? Okay.
So how do we get there? The sources point out several things happening basically at the same time. First, that data sound at the end of what, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes right before the Y sound at the beginning of you, it often undergoes something called assimilation. Basically, the TWR sound changes to become more like the Y sound it's next to, and it turns into a chi sound, like in cheese.
Ah, so what you start sounding like whatcha.
Exactly. Whatch. Then The auxiliary verb are, it's often reduced dramatically. Sometimes it almost disappears completely in really casual, fast speech. It becomes just a little schwa sound, like sure, or sometimes nothing,
Just swallowed up.
pretty much. And the pronoun you is also frequently reduced. Instead of the full Jew sound, it becomes a weaker J sound. So, watcha, plus a weak. Yeah,
What, yeah?
kind of. And then finally, that ing ending on doing. Very commonly, the final G sound gets dropped in informal speech. So doing sounds more like doing.
So putting it all together, what are you doing?
What you doing?
You doing
Or
good.
maybe even faster. What you doing? It's a smooth, connected flow.
Wow. Okay, so you're going from 4 clearly articulated words, what are you doing, which takes quite a bit of mouth movement,
Right.
to this rapid-fire, blended stream of sound, what you doing, where sounds have changed, sounds have dropped out.
Efficiency. It's faster and easier for the mouth to produce.
And that's just one very short, very common phrase.
Exactly. The sources use another prime example. I don't know.
Okay, another super common one.
Again, pronounce each word separately. I don't know, and it sounds a bit foreign, a bit deliberate.
Uh-huh.
Natural speech almost always reduces this. What do you usually hear? I don't know. Exactly. So here, the source highlights the elision, the dropping out of the final T sound in don't. It just vanishes in casual speech before the K sound of no.
Right, because saying don't know with a clear T sound is actually a bit clunky. Don't know. It interrupts the flow.
It really does. So the T disappears. The vowel sound in don't also often reduces to a schwa or something close to it. And the two words just link fluidly. I don't know.
It almost feels like one word sometimes. You don't know.
It basically functions as one unit in spoken English. This reduction is so common it's practically a single lexical item. Learners absolutely need to be aware of it.
Okay, so understanding and crucially being able to recognize this connected speech is absolutely vital according to your sources. Why is it so critical?
Well, think about it from the listener's perspective. If you're listening and your brain is expecting to hear those separate dictionary form words, what are you doing?
Yeah, and instead you hear, what you doing?
Your brain struggles to match the incoming sound to the words you expected. It creates a processing lag. It slows down your comprehension. Or worse, it might cause you to miss the meaning entirely, especially in fast conversation.
Because the sound shape is just completely different.
Exactly. It's not just about speed. It's about the actual form of the words changing when they're spoken quickly and naturally together. Training your ear to hear these changes, these links, these reductions. It's like getting the decoder ring for native speech.
I like that, a decoder ring.
It unlocks much faster and smoother comprehension because you start anticipating these patterns instead of being surprised by them.
And I guess the flip side is as you train your ear to hear these connections, you also start to feel more comfortable producing them yourself, maybe.
That's the idea. When you consciously incorporate some of these links and reductions appropriately, of course, considering speed and context, which we'll definitely get to,
Right.
your own speech starts to flow more smoothly. It sounds less choppy, less effortful, and closer to that native rhythm the sources describe.
So the actionable insight here, straight from the material, is to make listening a really active process. Don't just put on a podcast and hope you absorb it.
No, passive listening has its place, but for this, you need active focus.
Focus not just on vocabulary, but on the sound stream itself. Listen specifically for where words link up. Listen for sounds that seem to disappear or change.
Maybe focus on just short phrases at first when you're listening to your sources, podcasts, movies, whatever.
Oh.
Hit pause, rewind. Try to identify exactly how those sounds are connected, what actually happened between word A and word B.
It requires a real shift in perception, doesn't it? Moving from thinking about discrete word units to hearing the continuous melody and rhythm of the language.
It really does. It's tuning into the music, not just the lyrics.
Okay, so we've covered how to train your ear and observe like that language detective. But how do you bridge the gap from just observing the sound to actually producing it yourself more naturally? This is where your sources introduce a technique they really champion. Shadowing.
Ah, yes. Shadowing. It's presented in the material as a highly effective, very active method for directly copying the sound patterns, the intonation, the rhythm, basically the whole delivery of native speakers.
It's not just repeating the words back then.
No, much more than that. It's imitating the entire sound package, the music and the lyrics together.
Okay. And the sources provide a pretty clear step-by-step guide on how to actually do this first step.
First, you select a short audio clip. The material suggests something manageable, maybe just one or two sentences to start.
From authentic native content, right? Like a TV show, a podcast clip, a YouTube video.
Exactly. The key is that it's natural, everyday spoken English, not slow, instructional audio.
Okay, got the clip. Step 2.
Step 2, as outlined, is you listen carefully to that sentence or short phrase, then you pause the audio, and you repeat it exactly as you heard it.
Exactly. What does that mean here?
It means you focus on mimicking everything. The intonation, that rise and fall of the voice, the speed, the pace it was delivered at, even the emotion or attitude conveyed by the speaker. Were they happy, sad, sarcastic?
You're aiming for a precise carbon copy of the sound.
That's the goal, yes, a vocal photocopy.
Okay. And then comes the actual shadowing part, the third step.
Right. This is where you play the audio clip again, but this time you try to speak at the same time as the native speaker, like you're their shadow.
Ah, okay. So you're trying to synchronize your voice with theirs, maybe running just a fraction of a second behind them, like an echo.
Exactly like an echo. You're speaking along with them, trying to match their pace and melody in real time.
The sources use a fantastic and pretty memorable example from that TV show, Friends.
Oh, the Ross example, yes.
Ross yelling, "We were on a break!" Why is that specific line such a good example for shadowing?
Because its delivery is just iconic, isn't it? It's not just the words "we were on a break," it's how he says it. Everyone knows that line delivery.
Oh, absolutely. He says it with such, like, distinct emphasis, often really tense, maybe slightly exasperated,
Yeah, defensive.
with strong stress on "we were" and maybe on break. It's dripping with a very specific emotional tone. You can hear the history of the argument in those few words.
And that is precisely what you're trying to capture with shadowing. By attempting to repeat "we were on a break,"
Hmm.
with that specific emphasis, that specific speed variation, maybe there's a slight pause before "on a break," then he rushes it out, that specific tone of voice.
You're doing way more than just saying the words.
Exactly. You are actively practicing the melody and the rhythm of native English as it's used to convey specific meaning and specific emotion. You're training your mouth, your tongue, your vocal cords to physically produce sounds in that particular sequence and style.
It's like muscle memory for your mouth.
That's a huge part of it. The sources use an analogy here that I think is perfect and really clarifies why shadowing is so effective.
What's the analogy?
They compare it to training in the gym, but for your voice and your ear.
Ah, okay. I like that. A workout for your speaking.
It's a brilliant comparison, I think. When you go to the gym, you're not just, thinking about lifting weights. You're physically engaging specific muscles. You're building strength, improving coordination, developing muscle memory for specific movements, right?
Right. You do reps to make it automatic.
Shadowing does the same kind of thing for your language skills. You are physically training the muscles involved in articulation, your lips, your tongue, your jaw. You're making them move in ways that might be unfamiliar.
And you're training your ear, too.
Definitely. You're training your ear to perceive subtle nuances in sound, rhythm, and intonation that you might not have even noticed before when you were just passively listening.
And over time, the idea is that producing these natural sounds becomes more automatic, less conscious effort.
That's the goal. You're building both muscle memory for the physical movements and auditory awareness for the sound patterns. It becomes more intuitive. It's a workout for your whole speaking apparatus and your auditory processing system.
So shadowing basically takes those observations we discussed in the first step, hearing the connected speech, noticing the rhythm, the tone, and turns them into active, physical, imitative practice.
Exactly. You're consciously trying to replicate what you observed, building the physical and auditory skills needed for that natural delivery.
And it sort of bypasses the need to think about complex grammar rules or abstract pronunciation charts in the moment.
To some extent, yes. It helps you internalize those patterns through direct copying and repetition, which can often be more effective for pronunciation and flow than purely analytical study.
It's about building that intuitive feel for the language's flow, getting the music right.
Precisely.
Okay, so we're training our ear to observe, we're using shadowing to copy the sound and the rhythm. But what about the actual words and phrases we choose? Your sources point out that sounding natural isn't just about how you pronounce things.
No, definitely not. It's also very much about the vocabulary and, maybe more importantly, the phrases you choose to use.
Right, because native speakers, they draw upon this huge pool of everyday expressions, idioms, phrasal verbs, things that go way beyond the basic dictionary definitions of individual words.
Absolutely. And using these common phrases makes your English sound much more authentic, It sounds less like it's been maybe translated directly, word for word from your first language.
Yeah, less foreign sounding, maybe.
Exactly. And it also helps you navigate the subtle nuances of everyday conversation more effectively.
The sources give some fantastic, really concrete examples of this. Like, instead of relying only on saying, I agree.
Which is perfectly correct, of course. Everyone understands I agree.
Sure, but it can sound a little repetitive, maybe a bit formal sometimes, if you use it exclusively in every situation.
Right. So the sources highlight a whole range of alternatives that native speakers use constantly. They mention phrases like,
Like, totally. Exactly. Absolutely.
yeah, those short, punchy ones.
Mm.
And maybe I couldn't agree more.
And the beauty is in the subtle differences between them, isn't it? Totally, exactly, and absolutely feel quite similar.
They do. They're often used for quick, emphatic agreement, especially in informal chats. They signal strong alignment, like, yes,
Yeah.
what you just said is spot on.
Whereas I couldn't agree more also expresses strong agreement, but maybe feels a touch more formal or carries a bit more weight, depending on how you say it.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
It can sound a bit more considered. Using these alternatives, it just adds color to your speech. It shows you have fluency in different registers, different levels of formality, and it makes your side of the conversation more dynamic, less predictable.
Okay, that makes sense. Another very common scenario the sources illustrate is needing to say, I don't know.
Ah, yes. Happens all the time.
And while I don't know is perfectly fine, totally normal.
Meeting speakers frequently use alternatives. The sources mention ones like, I have no idea.
Right, or maybe I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yes, that's a good one, adding that little softener, to be honest. And then there's the very informal one.
Beats me.
Beats me.
Beats me is such a prime example of those phrases that if you try to translate them literally word for word into many other languages.
It makes absolutely no sense. What is beating who?
Exactly. But in English, beats me is a super common, very casual way of saying, I really have no idea. And it often implies the question is maybe a bit difficult or confusing, or you just haven't got a clue.
Right. And knowing when and how to use a phrase like beats me versus, say, I'm not sure, to be honest, shows a real command of informal English and register.
So these phrases, they're like linguistic shortcuts. And social signals, too.
Definitely. They help the conversation flow more quickly and naturally than if you always had to construct full formal sentences from scratch for every little thing. And they convey attitude, formality, levels of certainty.
So learning them helps you sound less hesitant, maybe, more integrated into the typical back and forth of English conversation patterns.
I think that's exactly right. It helps you participate more smoothly.
Okay, so the actionable insight from your sources here is when you're listening to native speakers in movies, podcasts, conversations, actively notice these kinds of everyday phrases. Don't just pull out individual new words for your vocabulary list.
Although that's useful too.
But also, grab these chunks of language. Note down, I have no idea as a unit or beats me as a unit.
Right. Treat them like single vocabulary items.
And then, the sources suggest, make a conscious effort to incorporate just one or two new ones into your active speaking vocabulary each week. Maybe swap out I agree for exactly just once this week in a practice chat.
Or try using I have no idea the next time you genuinely don't know something instead of just defaulting to, I don't know.
Yeah.
Start small, build gradually. Don't try to use 10 new idioms tomorrow.
Right. That would probably sound unnatural, too. It's about building fluency at the phrase level, the chunk level, not just the individual word level.
Well put.
Okay, so we've explored some key techniques, observing the sound, shadowing to copy it, expanding your phrase book with these natural chunks. Now, drawing again from your sources, let's turn our attention to what not to do. Because being aware of common pitfalls is just as important, right? Certain habits can really hold you back from sounding natural.
Oh, definitely. The sources highlight a few traps that learners often fall into. And the first common mistake mentioned is trying to speak too fast.
This is incredibly common, isn't it? I hear this a lot. There seems to be this misconception among some learners that speed equals fluency. Like, if I can just talk faster, I'll sound more native.
It's understandable why people think that, because native speakers can speak quickly. But the sources offer a really crucial clarification about the reality of native speech. True fluency isn't just about raw speed.
It's more about...
It's about speaking smoothly, with a natural rhythm, appropriate pacing, speeding up sometimes, slowing down other times, and using strategic pauses effectively.
So just speaking really, really fast, but maybe without that rhythm and clear pronunciation?
Actually makes you harder to understand, not more fluent. Think of it like a musician, maybe playing all the right notes, but just rushing through them incredibly fast without any feeling or dynamics or timing.
It just sounds like noise, not music. Chaotic, not virtuosic.
Exactly. Natural speech, even fast natural speech, has variations. It has light and shade. There are moments of rapid delivery, sure, but there are also pauses for emphasis, pauses for breathing, pauses to let the listener process, or even just, pauses while you think for a split second.
Right. A constant breakneck speed without those natural ebbs and flows just sounds mechanical, unnatural, even if the words themselves are pronounced perfectly.
Precisely. So focus on clarity and rhythm first. Speed will come more naturally later.
Okay, good advice. What's the second mistake your sources flag?
The overuse of slang.
Ah, slang. A tricky one.
It is. Now, let's be clear. The sources acknowledge that slang is a vibrant and important part of any living language, and English has tons of it. Using some slang appropriately can definitely make you sound more natural and integrated in certain situations.
But there's a big but.
There's a big but. The danger, as the sources rightly point out, is using too much slang, or maybe worse, using it in the wrong context.
It's like wearing, I don't know, beach shorts and flip-flops to a formal wedding. You might technically be wearing clothes, but it's completely inappropriate for the situation and makes you stick out like a sore thumb.
That's a perfect analogy. You know the words, but you haven't understood the social rules, the context.
And the sources give a vivid example of this.
They do. They mention using a phrase like, yo, bro, that's lit.
Okay, heard that one.
The material notes that yes, this phrase exists, and yes, it is used by some people in some context, but it's highly informal. It's often associated with specific age groups or social circles, and it's very context specific.
So if you were, say, in a professional meeting or giving a presentation or maybe speaking with someone significantly older than you or someone in a position of authority.
Dropping a yo, bro, that's lit into the conversation would sound incredibly unnatural, probably awkward, possibly even disrespectful, and definitely jarring. It signals you don't understand the social norms of that situation.
It comes back to that concept of register, which we touched on earlier when we were talking about phrases like beats me.
Exactly. Register is all about understanding which style of language is appropriate, for which formal situations need formal language, informal situations allow for informal language, casual chats allow for casual language and slang, technical discussions need technical terms, and so on.
And slang belongs primarily in those informal or casual registers.
Right. Your sources emphasize that slang is like a really potent spice. A little pinch can add flavor and authenticity if used in the right dish at the right time.
But dump the whole jar in, or use chili powder in your dessert.
And you'll ruin the whole thing. You'll sound forced or awkward or like you're trying way too hard to fit in without actually understanding the underlying social context. Use slang sparingly and wisely. Observe how native speakers use it first.
Got it. Less is often more with slang, unless you're very sure of the context. Okay, and the final common mistake mentioned in the sources.
This one ties into everything we've discussed about practice, really. It's simply not practicing speaking out loud enough.
This seems almost too obvious to mention, but maybe it's why it's such a common pitfall. People underestimate its importance.
Quite possibly. It's very easy for learners to fall into the trap of doing a lot of passive learning, listening for hours, reading extensively, studying grammar rules online, maybe doing vocabulary apps.
All valuable things.
All valuable, yes, but they minimize or completely avoid the actual physical act of speaking the language, making the sounds, moving their mouth.
And the consequence, according to the sources, is pretty straightforward and inevitable, isn't it?
Yes. Your pronunciation and your overall spoken fluency simply will not improve significantly if you don't practice speaking. Listening and reading provide essential input. They help you understand the language, see how it's structured, learn new words, observe native speakers.
But that's only half the equation.
It's only half. Language production, speaking, and writing is a physical skill, just like playing the piano or learning to swim or riding a bike.
Right. You can read books about swimming technique all day long, watch videos of Olympic swimmers.
Understand the physics of buoyancy perfectly.
But you will absolutely not learn to swim until you actually get in the water and start moving your arms and legs and trying not to sink.
Exactly the same principle applies here. You need to engage the muscles in your mouth, your tongue, your throat. You need to physically feel how sounds are formed, how they link together smoothly, how the rhythm feels when you produce it yourself.
So practicing speaking out loud gives you that crucial feedback loop.
It does. It provides essential kinesthetic feedback the feeling of the movements and auditory feedback you actually hear yourself speaking. You can then compare what you hear, consciously or even subconsciously, to the native models you've been listening to, and you start to make tiny adjustments.
Trying to close the gap between your sound and their sound.
Exactly. If you only ever listen, you're missing this entire vital output practice that's necessary to build the muscle memory for pronunciation and develop that smooth, natural delivery we're aiming for.
Okay. So the remedies to these pitfalls, as outlined in your sources, seem pretty clear. First, prioritize speaking smoothly and clearly with natural rhythm over just raw speed.
Right. Clarity and rhythm first.
Second, use slang judiciously. Understand the context, understand the register, and when in doubt, maybe leave it out.
Good rule of thumb. Observe more than you use initially.
And third, make dedicated, consistent practice speaking out loud a non-negotiable part of your learning routine, even if it's just talking to yourself.
Absolutely. Essential advice drawn straight from the sources for anyone serious about sounding more natural.
Now let's broaden our perspective a little bit, drawing again on the sources to explore a really fascinating aspect that goes beyond just individual sounds and words, the cultural dimension, how the way we speak English carries meaning.
Yes, this is a subtle but really powerful point made in the material. How you speak, your tone of voice, your intonation patterns, the overall rhythm you use these elements carry significant social and emotional meaning, and they can really influence how others perceive you, especially in English-speaking cultures.
So it's not just about being understood grammatically.
No, it goes deeper. The sources point out that your tone and pronunciation can affect perceptions of your confidence, your friendliness, your sincerity, maybe even your intelligence or trustworthiness, fairly or unfairly. The music matters.
This is where intonation becomes incredibly important, and your sources really highlight its impact. Just to clarify, intonation is...
Intonation is essentially the melody of the language. It's the rise and fall of your voice's pitch as you speak a sentence.
Yeah.
It's like adding musical notes to the words to give them extra layers of meaning.
Okay. And the sources use a simple but really effective example, the phrase, "How are you?"
A classic greeting, yeah.
If you say this with a completely flat, monotonous tone like, "How are you?" How did that come across?
Well, it sounds robotic, obviously unnatural. But culturally, it might also sound a bit cold or bored or like you're not actually interested in the other person's answer at all. It can feel dismissive.
Right. But if you say the exact same words, "How are you?" but with a friendly rising tone, especially maybe rising a bit at the end.
How are you? Like that.
Yeah, like that. It sounds warm, it sounds welcoming, it sounds genuinely inquisitive, and much more natural in most social contexts.
So the exact same words transmit completely different social cues and feelings based solely on the intonation pattern the melody used.
That's powerful. And intonation does so much more than just signal questions or greetings, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's how we convey enthusiasm. That's amazing. Or doubt. Are you sure? Or how we list items, how we milk up, eggs up, and bread down.
Yeah.
How we show contrast or sarcasm. Oh, great idea. Surprise, boredom. Pretty much the whole spectrum of human emotion and attitude is layered onto our speech through intonation.
So learning to use English intonation patterns correctly is absolutely vital, not just for sounding natural, but for effective communication, for making sure you convey your intended meaning and emotion accurately.
Totally vital. And also for understanding the intended meaning and emotion of others. If you don't pick up on the intonation cues, you can easily misunderstand someone's attitude or intention. It's crucial for navigating those underlying social and emotional layers in English conversation.
Okay. And the sources also circle back here to those reductions we discussed earlier, like gonna and wanna, but frame them in this cultural context.
Yes, they revisit them, but frame them as a distinct cultural feature, particularly prominent in informal American English, which, let's face it, is a very common model for many learners around the world due to media exposure.
Right. We talked about connected speech phenomena generally, but these specific super high frequency reductions like going to becoming gonna and want to becoming wanna
Are presented in the sources as key markers of informal spoken fluency, especially in American English. They are not seen as lazy or bad English in casual context.
they're just normal, expected even.
They are predictable, ingrained features of casual speech. The sources emphasize that being able to recognize these common reductions and also to use them yourself, again, crucially, in appropriate informal settings.
Is really important.
It's crucial, they argue. It helps you blend in more with native speakers, making your own speech sound more natural and relaxed in casual chats. And maybe even more importantly, it dramatically improves your listening comprehension because native speakers use them constantly without even thinking about it.
Yeah, I can see that. Trying to pronounce going to and want to fully and clearly in the middle of a fast, casual conversation might actually make you sound less natural to a native speaker's ear.
It can, sometimes, because their ear is often unconsciously expecting the reduced form in that context. It can momentarily break the flow if you over-enunciate common function words like that in very relaxed speech.
Interesting. So, synthesizing this whole cultural dimension, then, paying deep attention to these non word elements, the overall tone, the specific intonation patterns for different meanings, the rhythm, and these common reductions when you listen.
Is just as important as understanding the vocabulary and grammar.
Seems like it, according to the sources. These elements carry immense social and emotional information, and they're absolutely essential for sounding natural and connecting effectively on a cultural level in English. You have to get the vibe right, not just the words.
Well said. It's the whole package.
So, wow, we've really done a deep dive today, pulling out, I think, the key insights from the sources you shared with us.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started by highlighting the absolute necessity of becoming a conscious observer and listener, focusing not just on individual words, but on the whole sound stream, the rhythm, and especially that concept of connected speech.
Right, how words link and change. We looked closely at examples like, what are you doing, becoming what you're doing, and I don't know, becoming, I don't know, and really broke down why those sounds merge and change.
Then we move to that powerful active practice technique, shadowing, the gym for your voice and ear.
Uh-huh. We walk through the steps, choosing a clip, repeating exactly, then speaking along with the native speaker.
Trying to copy everything, the sounds, the rhythm, the intonation, even the emotion, using examples like that classic Ross Geller line, "We were on a break."
All to build that physical and auditory muscle memory needed for more natural delivery.
We also discussed the importance of expanding your usable vocabulary beyond just single words to include those natural, everyday phrases and expressions that native speakers rely on constantly.
Like all the different ways to say, I agree, totally, exactly, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Or the alternatives for, I don't know, like I have no idea, or beats me.
And we talked about understanding the subtle nuances and context for those phrases to make your English sound less translated and more, well, authentic.
Then we spent some important time on the crucial step of navigating those common pitfalls.
Right, the things to avoid. The danger of speaking too fast without rhythm, mistakenly thinking speed equals fluency.
The awkwardness that can come from overusing slang or using it in the wrong context because you haven't grasped the idea of register.
And that fundamental error of simply not practicing speaking out loud enough, forgetting that language production is a physical skill that needs physical practice.
And finally, we explored that significant cultural dimension of spoken English.
Emphasizing how crucial tone and intonation are for conveying meaning, emotion, and social cues, like in the "how are you" example.
And how understanding and sometimes using common reductions like gonna and wanna helps you both sound more natural in informal settings and dramatically improve your comprehension when listening to native speakers.
The key thing is these aren't just abstract theoretical concepts from your sources. They are practical, actionable steps you can actually take.
Absolutely. And you don't need to be living abroad to apply them. You can use the wealth of English content, movies, music, podcasts, YouTube that's available to you right now, wherever you happen to be.
To train your ear more actively, to practice your mouth movements with shadowing, and to consciously expand your use of natural phraseology.
It's a journey, definitely. It takes time and effort.
But by focusing your practice consciously on these specific areas that were outlined in the material we looked at today, you will undoubtedly move closer to that goal of sounding more comfortable, more fluent, and more natural when you speak English.
Which brings us nicely to a final thought, maybe a little challenge, drawn directly from the source material for you, the listener, to consider as you wrap up listening to this deep dive.
Okay, what's the challenge?
Think about the English speakers you admire, or maybe who serve as your informal learning models. It could be someone from a TV show you watch regularly, a speaker from a podcast you listen to often, maybe even a language exchange partner you talk with.
Got someone in mind. Okay.
This week, based on what we've discussed today, pick just one small sentence, or even just a short phrase that they use, something that caught your ear, and consciously try to shadow it a few times. Really try to capture their sound, their rhythm.
Just one short phrase. Doable.
Or, alternatively, take one new natural expression from the examples we talked about, maybe a different way to agree, like Totally. Or an alternative to, I don't know, like, I'm not sure, to be honest, and make
Mm.
it your mission to use it just once or twice this week.
Maybe in a practice conversation, or even just when you're practicing speaking alone, thinking out loud.
Exactly. The point is to take immediate action, however small. What single, tangible step will you take first based on the insights from this deep dive?
Because taking that first small, concrete step is where the real progress begins, right?
Absolutely. We truly hope this deep dive into your sources has provided some clarity, some practical direction, and maybe some renewed motivation for your English learning journey.
Thanks so much for sharing your sources with us, and thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, it was great exploring this.
Tomorrow, following a little hint in our material, we'll be diving into another really important topic for learners: how you can effectively practice speaking English even when you're practicing completely by yourself.
Ooh, that's a good one. Solo practice strategies. Definitely don't miss that one. Until then.
Keep observing, keep listening actively, keep practicing out loud, and enjoy the process of sounding more and more natural in English.
Bye for now.